Welcome back to Grimverse History, where we uncover the strange and forgotten sides of history. Tonight we enter the tragic final chapter of Marie-Antoinette's life, a story filled with unimaginable suffering far worse than the moment she stood before the guillotine. Imagine a young queen once living in unimaginable luxury, now a prisoner stripped of everything that made her royal. She was once known for her elegance, her fine gowns, her lavish parties, but as the revolution gained power, she was thrust into a brutal captivity where every shred of her dignity was taken from her. Why was Marie-Antoinette subjected to such unimaginable cruelty? What happened behind the walls of the prison before she even stood in front of the guillotine? If this story has captivated you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another journey into the hidden corners of history. It's the year 1793. The revolution is in full swing, and the once gilded halls of Versailles are a distant memory. A once feared queen is now a prisoner, awaiting a fate that no one could escape. Her execution was not the tragedy. What preceded it was far worse. In the early hours of August 1793, while Paris still lay under a heavy silence, she was ripped from the arms of her family. Separated from her children, denied even a moment of comfort, she was taken to the conciergerie, a damp, shadowy prison that Parisians ominously called the waiting room of the guillotine. There was no longer a queen, only prisoner number 280. Her new reality consisted of rats, sweating stone walls, and two guards who never once blinked as they stared at her. Every movement was recorded, every small attempt at dignity blocked, and while the revolution screamed beyond her walls, while the people who had once bowed before her now demanded her execution, another story unfolded in that cell. The story of the woman behind the symbol, a woman forced to face not only death, but a deliberate attempt to break her spirit before she even reached the scaffold. This is the story of what they did to Marie-Antoinette before the guillotine called her. A story where humiliation met dignity, and where, in the most unlikely place, she found her final crown in the silent endurance of suffering. Marie-Antoinette lived in a cramped, damp cell, where the humidity clung to everything: the walls, the blankets, even her own skin. A pile of straw served as her bed. A single candle had become her only companion. A wooden screen divided the room in two, behind which she was supposed to dress and undress. But even that small piece of privacy was denied to her. Two soldiers stood guard day and night, denying her the right not to be seen. She slept under their watchful eyes. She ate under their watchful eyes. The surveillance was not just control. It was a reminder that she was no longer queen, no longer mother, barely considered human, just a body under close guard. The news from the outside world was lost in distorted whispers, echoes of a world that had moved on without her. Yet one memory remained painfully alive, a wound that refused to heal, the memory of her son, Louis Charles. Just a month earlier, in the Temple prison, revolutionaries had stormed into her room after midnight. Looking for the little prince, Marie-Antoinette had thrown herself over him, desperately pleading, "He's just a child." These cries meant nothing. The guards had torn her away from him, while the terrified 8-year-old boy was dragged from her arms. His cries stayed imprisoned in her mind, endlessly replaying in the darkness. She would never see him again. Among the few possessions she managed to hide from the guard, she kept a tiny portrait of her son, and a lock of his hair tucked into her corset. It was her relic, the last trace of warmth in a world frozen by fury. Her only source of human kindness was Rosalie Leopold, a young servant assigned to care for her. Rosalie later confessed that the queen only broke down when speaking of her children. Then the royal facade fell, revealing a devastated mother whispering the names of her children like a prayer. Even this vulnerability had become a game for her jailers. They mocked her, provoked her with crude comments, laughed at the death of her husband. But in that suffocating cell, surrounded by hostility, Marie-Antoinette began to turn her pain into defiance. She learned to move slowly, to speak softly, to show no fear. Those who watched her expected a broken woman. When did it all begin to fall apart? When did they stop being people and become symbols of hate? No answer came, only the dawn, and with it, another day in this small stone coffin. Beyond the walls, she heard the city merchants shouting the revolutionary drums, the distant bells of Notre Dame, reminding her that life continued without her during those long weeks. The woman, once scorned by an entire nation, was stripped of everything that made her human. Yet, from this stripping, something unexpected began to form. A calm, almost sacred dignity, the kind only those who have lost everything and have nothing left to fear can possess. Then, in October, the door to the cell opened again, this time not to take away a child, but to take her to her trial. In the dark hours before dawn on October 14, 1793, the iron door opened once more. This time it was to drag her before the revolutionary version of justice, a justice already carved into stone long before she entered the hall. Marie-Antoinette was escorted through the halls of the conciergerie, surrounded by armed guards. She wore the same black dress she had worn to mourn her executed husband. Still, she remained calm, almost disconcertingly composed. People watched her from the shadows. Some spat insults, others simply stared, torn between fear and fascination. The revolutionary tribunal, crowded with spectators, resembled more of a stage than a courtroom. Flickering torches lit the faces of the judges, rigid and impassive as carved marble. And in front of them, on a simple wooden bench, sat the woman who had once been Queen of France. The public prosecutor, Antoine Quentin Fouquier Tinville, opened the debate with a voice made for spectacle. His words dripped with malice, every sentence designed to provoke roars from the crowd. He listed the accusations with theatrical precision. Treason, conspiracy with foreign enemies, squandering the nation's money, corrupting France's morals. Each phrase triggered waves of applause, boos, and stomping feet. But no one cared about the facts. The revolution needed a villain, a body on which to pin years of hunger, taxes, and war. And she was the chosen emblem. Marie-Antoinette, deprived of a true defense attorney and of 100 days to prepare her case, spoke only when allowed. Her voice was soft but firm. She did not contest the charges, not with indignation, but with the exhaustion of someone who already knew the outcome could not be changed. Witnesses paraded one after another. Some recited accounts straight from pamphlets and slanders. Others invented stories on the spot. They spoke of decadent feasts, mocking banquets, excesses at Versailles. The public howled in approval, feeding on every invented scandal. Then came the accusation that froze the entire room. The prosecutor held up a sheet of paper, paused dramatically, and announced the most vile charge of all. She had committed incest with her own son. A cold silence swept through the courtroom. Even some hardened revolutionaries lowered their gaze. The news spread through the gallery. Little Louis Charles, torn from her arms months ago, had been forced to sign false confessions. He had been made to repeat horrible phrases he couldn't even understand. For a moment, Marie-Antoinette stood still. She seemed carved from stone, staring into nothingness. The judges waited. The spectators held their breath. Then she rose. She did not look at the prosecutor or the jury. Instead, she turned toward the women of the market, the mothers, those who had once marched toward her asking for bread, and in a voice as clear as a bell, she simply said, "I call upon all the mothers here." She did not need further explanations. A wave rippled through the crowd. Whispers, exclamations, even tears. For a moment, the monstrous caricature from the pamphlets vanished, replaced by the truth. A mother separated from her child, humiliated beyond understanding. Fouquier Tinville, furious at the change in atmosphere, slammed his fist on the table and forced the procedure to continue. But something had cracked. A glimmer of guilt, or perhaps humanity, flickered across a few faces in the room. Marie-Antoinette collapsed back into her seat, exhausted. This single moment had taken the last of her strength. When had it all started to unravel? When had they ceased to be people and become symbols of hatred? No answer came. Only the dawn, bringing with it another day in this small stone coffin. Beyond the walls, she could hear the city's merchants calling out the revolutionary drums, the distant bells of Notre Dame, reminding her that life continued without her during these long weeks. The woman once despised by a nation was stripped of everything that made her human. Yet from this stripping, something unexpected formed, a calm almost sacred, a dignity that only those who have lost everything and have nothing left to fear can possess. Then, in October, the door to the cell opened once more. This time, not to take her child, but to take her to trial. In the dark hours before dawn on October 14, 1793, the iron door opened again. This time it was to drag her before the revolutionary version of justice, a justice already carved in stone long before she entered the courtroom. Marie-Antoinette was led through the halls of the conciergerie, surrounded by armed guards. She wore the same black mourning gown she had worn since the death of her executed husband. Still, she remained calm, almost unsettlingly composed. People watched her from shadowed corners. Some spat insults, others merely stared, torn between fear and fascination. The revolutionary tribunal, packed with spectators, resembled more of a stage than a courtroom. Flickering torches illuminated the faces of the judges, stiff and impassive as sculpted marble. And before them, on a simple wooden bench, sat the woman who had once been Queen of France. The public prosecutor, Antoine Quentin Fouquier Tinville, began the proceedings with a voice made for spectacle. His words dripped with malice, every sentence designed to provoke the crowd's roars of approval. He listed the charges with theatrical precision: treason, conspiracy with foreign enemies, embezzling the nation's money, corrupting the morals of France. Each sentence triggered waves of applause, jeers, and raised fists, but no one cared about the facts. The revolution needed a villain, a body to pin years of hunger, taxation, and war on, and she was the chosen emblem. Marie-Antoinette, deprived of a proper lawyer and of the 100 days to prepare her defense, spoke only when permitted. Her voice was soft but firm. She did not contest the charges, not with indignation, but with the exhaustion of someone who knew the outcome could not be changed. Witnesses paraded one after another. Some recited accounts taken directly from pamphlets and slanders. Others invented stories on the spot. They spoke of decadent feasts, mocking banquets, excess at Versailles. The audience howled in approval, devouring each fabricated scandal. Then came the accusation that froze the entire room. The prosecutor waved a sheet of paper, paused dramatically, and announced the vilest charge of all. She had committed incest with her own son. A cold silence swept through the courtroom. Even some hardened revolutionaries lowered their gaze. The news spread like wildfire through the gallery. Little Louis Charles, ripped from her arms months earlier, had been forced to sign false confessions. He had been made to repeat horrific phrases that he could not even comprehend. For a moment, Marie-Antoinette didn't move. She seemed carved from stone, staring into the void. The judges waited. The spectators held their breath. Then she rose. She didn't look at the prosecutor or the jury. Instead, she turned to the women in the market, the mothers, those who had marched toward her demanding bread. And in a voice clear as a bell, she simply said, "I call upon all the mothers here." She needed no further explanation. A wave passed through the crowd, whispers, exclamations, even tears. For a moment, the monstrous caricature from the pamphlets vanished, replaced by the truth. A mother separated from her child, humiliated beyond comprehension. Fouquier Tinville, furious at the shift in the mood, slammed his fist on the table and forced the proceedings to continue. But something had cracked. A flicker of guilt, or perhaps humanity, crossed a few faces in the room. Marie-Antoinette sank back into her seat, exhausted. This single moment had taken the last of her strength. The wooden cart creaked through the streets of Paris, pulled by two exhausted horses. Mud stained its sides, alongside the marks left by previous prisoners. Inside, Marie-Antoinette stood upright, the wind tugging at her simple white dress and her freshly cut hair. The journey lasted just over an hour. For the thousands lining the roads, it became a procession. They wanted to witness her fall, to see her broken. Some hurled insults, others threw stale bread. "There's the Carpathian widow," they shouted. "The Austrian, the thief of France." Yet what troubled most of the spectators wasn't her presence, it was her silence. She didn't react, didn't lower her head, didn't cry. Her expression remained composed, her posture unyielding, her gaze fixed in the distance. The cold wind blew through her shorn hair, yet she remained unmoved. Windows opened and shut as she passed. Some looked at her with open hatred, others with a respect tinged with guilt. Beneath the clattering of hooves, the cries of vendors, and the church bells, the city seemed to hold its breath. A gust of wind lifted the dust. The cart jolted violently over a stone. Marie-Antoinette stumbled, almost falling. A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd, but without help she stood back up, lifting her chin as if nothing had happened. Nearby, the market women, those who had once marched on Versailles for bread, watched her intently. The noise of the city crashed around her like a storm, yet inside, she was calm. While the crowd saw a humiliated queen, she felt something different, something unexpected. For the first time in years, she felt free. Free from court, from politics, from venomous rumors, from expectations, even from fear itself. Then, the cart turned one last corner, and the scene unfolded before her. The Place de la Révolution. At its center, standing against the pale sky, was the guillotine. Its dark wooden frame and gleaming metal blade cut a harsh silhouette in the midday light. Marie-Antoinette raised her chin. For a moment everything else faded. She understood that everything she had been, queen, wife, mother, would end on this wooden platform. But she also knew that her story no longer belonged to the men who had dragged her here. The cart stopped. The executioner, Charles-Henri Sanson, descended first, followed by his assistants. With her wrist bound and her feet steady, she stepped down from the cart to the jeers of the crowd. Each step toward the wooden stairs resonated like the final notes of a tragic symphony. The square thundered with cries, raised fists, mocking laughter, and the cold fascination that comes when an error dies before thousands of witnesses. The guillotine loomed above, silent and ready, its blade sparkling under the sun. Marie-Antoinette fixed her gaze upon it. Without a word, the executioner moved forward to guide her, and in that moment fate played its final cruel turn. The air around the scaffold tensed with anticipation. From somewhere in the crowd a voice erupted. "Vive la République!" Thousands responded in unison. Sanson gave the signal. The mechanism clicked, a harsh metallic sound. A heartbeat later, the blade fell with ruthless precision. Her body stilled. The executioner grasped her pale hair, lifting her head before the masses. A violent cheer rippled through the square. "Vive la nation! Vive la lutte!" For them, it was the victory of the revolution. For her, it was deliverance. Some witnesses later whispered that they saw something unusual, a look of peace on her face, a calm that seemed intact despite the violence. Her body was placed in a covered cart alongside the remains of those executed before her. No rites, no prayers, no coffin. She was taken to the Madeleine cemetery and thrown into a mass grave among strangers. There was no flower to mark the spot, no cross to honor her name, only earth and silence. The cold morning air of Paris still lingers in the silence of the moment. The sharp, unyielding sound of the guillotine echoes in your mind, and the city holds its breath in the aftermath of its revolution. Marie-Antoinette's story has ended, but a quiet dignity in the face of brutality lingers like a soft whisper in the shadows. Let the weight of the past settle into the quiet of your room. If you find yourself moved, please consider liking and subscribing to stay with us as we uncover more stories hidden in the corners of time. Goodbye, and we will meet again.